What's up, Buckeye fans? It's Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports here, and we are talking Buckeyes heading into the Big Ten championship game this weekend after the win over Michigan last Saturday, finally ending that losing streak to the rivals Wolverines. Now you've got a date with number 2 Indiana in Indianapolis, which is a matchup everyone has sort of been hoping for, I think, for the last several weeks. So we're going to get 1 versus 2 in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship, which should be an exciting game between two of the best teams in the country. Before we get started, we are going to have Joshua Perry on to talk about the Big Ten championship, to talk about what it means for Ohio State, former Buckeye linebacker, former national champion. We're also going to have Matt Weaver from our Indiana 24/7 sports site, to discuss the Hoosiers. But before we do that, make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, you hit that thumbs up button, hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you get all of our videos, all of our podcasts, all in one place on YouTube. If you are listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, then please leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. That is all very helpful for us. But let's get into it because we have a lot to talk about, and we're going to start on the Hoosier side of things with Matt Weaver from Peegs, our Indiana site. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Let's start with, I think, kind of the biggest question I get around here is, like, Indiana, if you think of it, it's a basketball school, right? Like, we don't talk a lot of football when we talk Hoosiers in the past, but these last 2 years obviously have been different under Curt Cignetti. What has been the biggest difference? I know we're going back a little bit, but why has he been able to convert this team, convert this program, garner this attention to become the number 2 team in the country as you're heading into a Big Ten championship game here?
Well, after Indiana's performance last night in Minnesota, I'm not sure how much of a basketball.
Okay, well, I wasn't going to bring that up.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. But I get asked that question a lot, and it's so hard to answer because he just has something that, he's just good at what he does. I mean, I'm not like he's his ability and culture and mindset and all that kind of stuff are buzzwords that all coaches use. But like the culture in that program is just unbelievable. Their ability to stay focused day in and day out. And in a game where things aren't going well, the Penn State game being a perfect example, they did not play not even close to their best game. Offensively, they struggled. They're down first play on the last drive. They get sacked, and they go down the field, and they have one of the greatest drives that I've ever seen from a team in that situation. And their ability just to move on from play to play, not let the last play. He always says that every play has a life of its own, like 6 to 8 seconds. Once it's over, it's over. You go on to the next play. And I mean, people can say that, but it's a different thing to kind of live it out. Him and his staff are very good evaluators of talent. If you look at the guys they brought in from the portal, they brought in good players, but not like, I mean, obviously Mendoza was a headliner, but it's been a number of G4 guys. Now they got a few more P4 guys in this last class for this season. They're really good at developing players. They're really good at scheming. Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan are 2 of the best coordinators, in my opinion, in the country. And then the guys that are working for them on both sides of the ball are outstanding at what they do. They've got a great plan. It's a whole combination of things, but it obviously starts at the top with Curt Cignetti. Watching him in practice is really interesting. When Tom Allen was here, you always knew where Tom Allen was. He was on a blowhorn. Cignetti's more CEO type. He like, there's a lot of times you don't even know where he is on the field. He'll kind of stand at midfield and just watch the offense and the defense go back and forth as they're doing their stuff. I'm sure he's very, very involved, but he hires guys. He lets them do. To me, it's probably very Saban-like. And I'm not saying he's Saban, but probably he learned it from Saban. You hire good guys and you let them do their job, and you coach the coaches coach the players. So it's just hard. I just think he has got an innate ability to identify talented coaches and players and then put them in a position to be really, really successful and execute at the highest level.
When he was hired a couple years ago, and had I told you that Indiana would be playing as an undefeated number 2 team in the country in the Big Ten championship game in just 2 years, what would have been your response at the time, do you think?
You probably need to go get drug tested, bud. I mean, I'm trying. No, I mean, I thought a couple of years before, like a year and a half before he got hired, when it was starting to go really sideways with Tom Allen. I mean, you guys have football coaches that are the best in the country, and you don't really make changes. But if you have in the sports you cover, you probably jot down some names of guys. Like I do it from like if I was the AD of Indiana, who would I go after with what our resources are, the tradition, and all that kind of stuff. So I thought Indiana needed to find a guy who I don't care what level he's been at, has gone in and had immediate impact on the program. A guy who went to a place with other guys' players, and in the first year they were successful. The two guys that came that when I did some research were him and Willie Fritz, who's now at Houston. The difference being is Signetti had worked at the P4 level. He had been at Pittsburgh with Johnny Majors, obviously worked at NC State with Chuck Amato, and then obviously with Saban, who's, in my opinion, the greatest of all time. So he had some really good P4 experience as an assistant. And so that kind of separated him from Fritz for me. But, I mean, he went to Indiana, PA. Like I said, I don't care what level you're at. If you go in immediately, the team's won 2 or 3 games, and you win 6 or 7, you know what you're doing. Like, you're a good coach. You just know how to impact change and winning. And so that's why I looked at him. The one drawback on him was he was 62, 63 years old. But right. Indiana, I mean, you know how this is. Stuff's changing in college football. We're getting to a point where there may just be 2 conferences at some point, where it's 2 super conferences. Indiana had to get on board. Like, they had to get this thing going, or they were going to be in big, big trouble. So you couldn't worry about 10 years from now or 15. You got to worry about, like, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. This was obviously a couple years ago, and obviously it's worked out for him. So, I thought they would be a lot more successful. I thought he would win. I can't sit here and say I thought they would go to the playoff 2 years in a row and that they'd be 12-0 in his second season. If I could, I would have bought a lotto ticket 2 years ago, and we wouldn't be on this conversation because I'd be retired somewhere.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
As you look ahead, obviously last year the team goes into the playoff. There's the Notre Dame game. I know there's a lot of talk about whether the Hoosiers deserve to be in. We don't need to go down that road. I think we're both on the same page there. But what did Indiana maybe take from that experience that they can use not only in this game, a postseason game, but in the college football playoff beyond that you think might help them?
Yeah, and Coach Sinetti's talked about that. He felt like that maybe they weren't quite ready for that stage. And it was started in Columbus a few weeks before, or I guess about a month before. Obviously the game started off good. They went down the field and scored, and then it was all Ohio State after that. And I think there's 2 things. I think the roster's better this year, but I also think they're more equipped. Last year they were kind of the feel-good story of college football. They were that upstart team. They were still the hunter and not the hunted. This year it's been different. Teams are trying to knock them off. Indiana's not Ohio State, but this year they've been on the same level. Like they're the team everybody's gunning for when they come into the opponent's stadium. So I think that's helped them. And I just think those experiences definitely helped them. I mean, they got punched in the face. They absolutely did. Ohio State punched them in the face big time, and they didn't respond well. And then Notre Dame did as well. So I think they've learned a lot. I think they've got, like I said, a better roster, and I just think they've got a better outlook on what it's going to take and what it entails to get over that hump.
As you look at this season, how big was that Oregon game for something like that, going out to a place like Autzen and winning the way the Hoosiers did for that belief and really the buy-in that everybody has seemed to have? And not they didn't have it before, but just proof that this concept works.
Yeah, it was huge. And obviously before that, and listen, Illinois is probably overrated at 9th in the country, but they blew their doors off. I think Illinois is still a quality team, but they weren't a top 10 team. But at that time, people were saying, well, a lot of people picked Illinois in that game, and then they went to Iowa, and that really helped too because that was a tough game. That Iowa played, and Iowa's Kinnick Stadium is a very difficult place to play. They had 2 weeks off going to that Oregon game, and the score was 30-20, but they dominated them. I mean, Oregon had like 64 yards of offense in the second half, and that's a really good offensive team. Indiana up front, and that's where I think they're better this year on both sides of the ball. I think they're a better team up front in the trenches, and their defensive line just really took it to Oregon, and I think that was a big one. I mean, you had the pick 6 from Mendoza. They get within, or they tied it up, and then they go right back down the field. Indiana does. And Mendoza makes throw after throw, play after play, and they get the touchdown and really put it away after that. So, yeah, I think that was a huge one. I mean, now listen, Oregon's a good team. Ohio State's on a different level, so they're going to have to play. They're going to have to play their best game this week. But I think they understand what it takes to to be in those situations and how to get through them.
You mentioned Fernando Mendoza a couple of times. We obviously heard from him earlier this week on the joint teleconference they did. What about him has made him as successful this year? Obviously, he had a good career at Cal, but I don't know how many people outside of Bloomington were talking about him at this level before the season. Why has it worked so well for him coming here and having the success that he's had?
Well, he's a great fit for the offense, and so was Curtis Rourke. But Rourke, obviously, we didn't find out after the season, but he was playing on basically one leg with that ACL injury, and he had a fantastic year. It's amazing he was able to do what he did, but he couldn't really move. And listen, Mendoza's not Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, but he can hurt you if he gets out of the pocket. He can make some plays. I think he's got, I want to say, maybe 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns this year, and he's made some plays with his legs. So that brings a different element. First of all, he's a talented player. He doesn't have excuse me, an elite arm. He's not going to blow your socks off with it the way he does, but he's got a good enough arm. He can make every throw you need a quarterback to make. He's got a really quick release. I think where he really excels is he's got a really quick release, and he's really, really accurate, even when he has to get rid of the ball quickly. And he's smart, and he works incredibly hard. I mean, Curt Cignetti, who is not one to, really praise guys a lot. I mean, he'll give him credit, but he has really been effusive in his praise of Mendoza and what kind of person he is, what kind of player he is, how hard he works. And so I think that's a big reason why there's the talent, and then there's what he does, from Sunday to Friday off the field that we don't see on his own and in practice to make himself the best player is. And like I said, 6'5", 225, he's got the size, the physical abilities, but then you combine that with, obviously he's a very, very smart guy, was going to go to Yale out of high school before Cal came in. And he's got high football IQ, and he's just, I think the teammates love him. They gravitate to him. And he's been obviously an outstanding addition to the program this year.
I feel like when we think about, and maybe you guys locally think differently, but when we think about this Indiana offense, it's a lot of RPO passing stuff, right? You hear about the receivers, you hear about Mendoza. The rushing attack's number 9 in the country. I just had to look that up to make sure I had that right. It seems like it's a more balanced offense than people think. Is that fair way to put it?
Yeah, and I think you could make the case, and the thing is, as well as Fernando's played, his numbers probably don't jump off the page. Now, some of that is they've had some games where he basically played maybe 3 quarters or 3/4 in a possession or something like that. There's a 3 or 4 game stretch where I think he almost missed an entire quarter of games because they were up by so much. But I think the running game is what drives this offense. I think when the running game's on, they're really, really tough to stop. They went out to Iowa. Iowa was able to kind of slow them down. Penn State was able to slow them down. Wisconsin in the first half was able to slow them down a little bit. But they went for 355 against Purdue. They've gone for some other big games. That's not going to happen Saturday. But they're going to have to run the ball well enough to keep Ohio State honest. If they're in a lot of 2nd and 9, 3rd and 8s, it's going to be a rough day because Ohio State's D-line is too good for that to happen. But, it is balanced. They've obviously got Surratt, you got Cooper, you got weapons on the outside. But I really think the running game is what drives this offense, and I think it's the most important component for them to be successful on that side of the ball.
As you look to this game in particular, are there anywhere you see Indiana like, hey, I like this matchup, something that you think the Hoosiers could take advantage of?
Listen, Julian Sayin has been fantastic. For a young guy to follow into Will Howard's footsteps after he won a national title and play as well as he had, but he's still a young guy. So, to me, I think a key is can they maybe confuse him a little bit? He seems like nobody's been able to do it so far this year, but can they figure out a way to show him something pre-snap and then post-snap it looks different and muddy the picture for him a little bit? I think Ohio State's obviously very good offensively, and disagree if I'm wrong here. I would say the running game was a little bit more explosive last year with Henderson and Quinch. Not that they're not good this year, but those guys were. Look what they're doing in the NFL. They're great players, and I felt like every time they touched the ball, they could go. Not to say that the guys they have this year can't, but it seems to be maybe not as much of an explosive. So I think stopping the run is going to be very important for Indiana Saturday night. Going against their defense, I don't know that there's a whole lot of weaknesses. What is it, like 7 points a game Ohio State's given up or something like that? It's just it's historically great defense this year. So, they'll try to find some. I think if they give Mendoza time, I think he can find open receivers, but that's going to be That's going to be the whole key. Last year, they could not protect Rourke. I mean, that, Ohio State got to him after that first drive, and they got to him for most of the game. So can they figure out a way to protect Mendoza? And IU's O-line has been a little bit banged up. They've been rotating at right tackle. Left guard Drew Evans hasn't played since, I think, UCLA, which was like October 25th. So they're a little bit, I think he's close. He warmed up before Purdue, but he didn't play. But the thing is he hasn't played since October 25th. Throwing him in against, was it Kenyatta Jackson and some of those guys on the inside that Ohio State has? I mean, that's a tough ask. So really, to me, football still comes down to who plays better up front. And I think whoever's offense and defensive line can perform better this weekend is going to go a long way to determine who wins this game.
Conversely to that question, what concerns you the most when you look at this matchup from an Indiana perspective?
Jeremiah Smith and Cardale Tate. I mean,
that might be the direction.
Yeah, and the reason why is obviously they probably scare everybody. Indiana's their one bugaboo, and it's gotten a lot better. But early in the season, they were having some Kennesaw State kind of exposed, which is fun. I mean, and they've actually been a decent G4 team this year, but they kind of exposed their secondary a little bit, and it was communication issues, like guys not being on the same page, so somebody was running free. If one of those guys is running free this week, it's you know what I mean. Just go get the kick return team on the field because it's going to be a touchdown. So that would concern me is covering those guys. Can they get pressure on Julian Sayin without blitzing? They've been pretty good this year. They're one of the top teams in tackles for loss and sacks. But there's been moments where they've struggled to generate pressure with just 4. Are they going to have to blitz? And then if you blitz and you don't get home, there's a lot of weapons outside of those two. I mean, I know Ennis has started to come on a little bit. Max Clare. I mean, there's weapons all over the field for the Buckeyes. So I would say, my biggest concern defensively is if you can rattle Julian Sayin a little bit, and can you stick to Jeremiah Smith and Cardale Tate long enough, so that you can hopefully get home on the quarterback. And then, like I said, going against that defense, it's going to be tough. They're going to have to run the ball. They don't have to go for like 200, but you got to be able to be in you got to stay ahead of the chain. So, 2nd and 6, 3rd and 4 or 5, so that you're not having to run real long routes to try to get first downs. Because if you have to do that, Caden Curry, an Indiana guy who's, give him credit. He stuck it out there, and he's having an awesome year, and kudos to him. But all those guys on that D-line, you're not going to be able to block them for 4, 5, 6 seconds. You're going to have to get the ball out quick.
I've watched a lot of Indiana games this year. I had friends that went there, and so there was always just kind of another team I paid attention to. I played soccer, so I watched their program a lot. But you can feel in some of these games the excitement among the fan base when, at least coming on TV. I'm sure it's like it in person. What do you think this will be like being in Lucas Oil for the first time for this fan base? What do you think the emotions will be like? And what would it mean to win a Big Ten title? They've not won the Big Ten since they went to the conference championship game and quite a bit further back to just winning one at all. What would this all mean for this group of fans and the program?
It would be huge for the program and for the fan base. It would obviously be huge. I mean, I think the only time they won the Big Ten title was 67, and then obviously there was no tournament back then. They went to the Rose Bowl, but that was so long ago. I mean, obviously most people weren't even around when that happened. So it would be huge. This game is kind of weird. I mean, obviously Ohio State's won it a bunch, but like for Ohio State, obviously it'd be another Big Ten title, but like only negative things could happen for Ohio State because they're number 1 in the country. The only thing that can happen to them is they fall in the grand scheme of things. It's a big deal, but like the playoff has kind of made these games a little bit, not as big. And I'm not trying to any way take away from that, because this would be a monster accomplishment for Indiana to not only win the Big Ten, but to beat the best program in the Big Ten to do it. I mean, Ohio State is the standard bearer in this conference. They have been for a while. Obviously, Michigan's done a lot of great things, but over in recent history, this has been the team that everybody, and Kirsten Eddy said that. He's asked about, kind of recruiting, but he said it. They are at their own level right now, and deservedly so. They've been fantastic. So it would be huge. It doesn't mean they're as good as Ohio State. It'd mean for one day you were better than Ohio State, but it would validate a lot of things. And I don't think a loss means you're not validating anything. Unless you get your doors blown off, then that's a little bit concerning. That would be kind of concerning. I don't think that'll happen this year. I think it'll be a competitive game. But it would be big. It would definitely be big. I think, and I would guess, and this is probably, Captain Obvious, but if you pulled the players on both teams, would you rather have the Big Ten title or the national title? It'd be a pretty easy, answer. But you'd love to have both. You know what I mean? I'm sure you'd love to have both, but it's a big game. It's a monster game. I think there's going to be a good IU turnout. Obviously, there'll be a good Ohio State turnout. That fan base is phenomenal in supporting that program. So it'll be. I'm really interested. It's weird because when they play each other, it's kind of tough to tell who's who because the colors are so similar. So unless you got Ohio State people wearing kind of that silver that they have, I know it's not really, it's gray, but it kind of looks silver. It's kind of hard to tell who's who in the stands, but I think it's going to be a great matchup. I think there's going to be programs will be well represented from the fans on both sides, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was talking with some guys the other day because we were talking about what we thought the split would be, and it's like we might have to wait until one team makes a play to hear it.
Yeah,
right? Just to
exactly.
Tell the difference. Last question for you, and this is looking beyond this, and I know matchups haven't been decided yet, but what would be a successful playoff run for Indiana? Obviously, winning a national championship would be huge, but like at this point, you're number 2 in the country. You've gone through this season undefeated. Where is the line of like this was a disappointment in the postseason versus hey, this is a success and something to build on?
Well, let's just assume for a second. Let's just they assume they don't win or whatever it is. Whatever happens Saturday, they're a top 4 seed, which I think both teams. Yeah, like both teams should be a top 4 regardless of who wins the game Saturday. I mean, Ohio State, if they lose, I don't think would drop more than a spot, maybe 2, but I think at most they maybe go down to 2. Indiana probably be 3 or maybe 4. So to me, you're going to be. It's a neutral field, but you're going to be the favorite, or you should be the favorite in the quarterfinal game, whoever you'll be playing and wherever you'll be playing. So I think you at least getting the semifinal is something that if they would lose the quarterfinal game, I think it'd be a little bit of a disappointment if you didn't win a game in the playoff. And I think getting to the semifinal and then hopefully having a chance at the national title. I think if you get to the national title, it's a successful season, regardless of what happens. Obviously, it'd be disappointing if you couldn't win that last game. But I think you got to at least win one game if you're Indiana. I mean, you've been number 2 now for weeks. I can't remember however long it's been. They've been the number 2 team, maybe right after Oregon. I think right around that time. I can't remember exactly when it was, and obviously Ohio State's been up there pretty much the entire season. So, I think these 2 teams have separated themselves from the rest of the country. I think it's not a huge gap, but I think there's a little bit of a gap. A&M was up there, but they've kind of faltered here at the end. And it wouldn't shock me if they're on opposites of the bracket. If there's a rematch, whenever the 19th of January or whatever the date is. Yeah, so I wouldn't be, and to me that would be pretty cool if that happened. So I think you got to at least get to the semifinals, and really, if you get that far, I think everything after that's kind of gravy. But I think you got to at least get to the semifinals and give yourself a legit shot to get into that final game.
Awesome, Matt. Well, thank you very much for joining. I know it's a busy week as we all get ready for this Big Ten championship. Yeah. I appreciate you taking some time out.
Yeah, this is old hat for you guys doing game coverage the week after the Michigan game. But for us, this is uncharted territory. We're not used to doing game coverage the week after.
We had to relearn how to do it because it's been since 2020, and that one we didn't even really. Hellwagon went, but I didn't go, and we didn't send photographers. So it's been a while. It's exciting. Looking forward to get there. It's always a fun weekend. So I hope to see you. I'm sure I'll see you in the press box there.
Oh yeah, we'll be up there in the next to the disciples and the Holy Ghost. We're so high up in that press box.
So, all right, Matt. I'll talk to you out there.
Yeah, be safe traveling over, bud. Talk to you later.
Thanks, you too. All right, thanks again to Matt Weaver from Peegs.com, the 24/7 sports site for Indiana. If you're listening and want to learn more about the Hoosiers, if you haven't paid a ton of attention to Indiana, that sounds kind of weird, and I'm sure you have seen Indiana because they're the number 2 team in the country. But you can go over and check out Matt and those guys' work at Peegs. They do a good job. As Matt said, the basketball stuff did not go as well as they hoped last night. So there's a lot to talk about football-wise. We are next going to be joined by Joshua Perry here shortly. And I'm excited to talk with Josh because he's obviously a guy who has played in this Big Ten championship game back when it was basically routine for Ohio State to go to Indy. So I'm curious to kind of get his thoughts on that time and look ahead to this game because there's only a handful of guys who have done it on the same level that Josh has. And now we are happy to be joined by former Ohio State linebacker, national champion, Joshua Perry. Josh, thanks for joining, man. How are things going?
Things are good. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Big Ten championship game. When you were playing at Ohio State, these were pretty much an annual tradition. It has not been the case since then. But let's go back to when you were playing in them. What did it mean to go to Indy? I know it happened a lot, but to be able to go and compete for your conference championship, even if it is routine, what did it mean for you and your teammates and coaches?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because my freshman year was the year we had the bowl ban, so we went 12-0. And we weren't able to compete for a conference title, and that meant a lot for us. Urban Meyer always used to talk about the idea of being competitive for championships in November, and so part of that was beating your rival and then going and winning a conference championship. Whatever happens after that, happens after that. So we felt like there was a missed opportunity there, and then the next year in 13, we went and played in it and ended up losing. That was a tough one. But it was, one of the bumps along the journey. When we got there to 14, that was the first year of the 12-team, or excuse me, the 14 playoff era. And we had no idea what was ahead of us outside of the opportunity to play for a Big Ten title. And we ended up having one of those style points, resume maker type games against Wisconsin. But the idea for us was that we wanted to win our conference. We had the opportunity in front of us. It was always one of our goals. Thereafter, it became pretty routine. Like there was that streak, I think, of 4 straight for Ohio State winning the Big Ten. Haven't been back in a little while, so I know it's probably going to mean a ton to this group. But Indy's close. The fans travel. It felt like a second home to us, but it was always the idea that winning the conference title was the first step in whatever the postseason journey was going to be.
The guys this week have talked about hearing about the energy in the stadium and the environment with that game. I've been there to cover it, but you've been on the field for it. What is that like as a player being in that game?
Yeah, I mean it's phenomenal, and Lucas Oil is a great venue. I know, like NFL stadiums, don't know how much I love them in college football, but that one, it certainly feels like it's smacking the footprint of some really awesome college towns. So the people love to travel there. It's a great city to host, but you get down on the field and it just feels big time. And it's one of those events where typically Buckeyes love to travel. I expect that this crowd is going to have a heavy Indiana flavor to it this year, but you get those true swings where you feel the fans all getting involved there because it is a neutral site. You almost get into that mentality of like, I'm playing in a professional arena, so I want to treat this week like I was a professional. And that was always really fun there. So it is energetic. Like I said, it's one of the great venues. It's easy for everybody except for the West Coast schools, of course, in the Big Ten to get to. And Indy's a great place. Like they do a really good job of making people want to come in town for that event.
Do you have a memory or two that really stands out from playing in one of those Big Ten championships?
Yeah, I would say the 14 one is the one that I like to remember, of course. We had a stretch in the postseason where we played the 3 Heisman finalists, the eventual winner as well. And that was test number 1 with Melvin Gordon. And I actually played with Melvin when I was on the Chargers. He's phenomenal, just an awesome dude. But he was having one of those years that we hadn't seen in a very long time. I think 2 weeks before he played him, he had over 400 rushing yards against Nebraska. And we knew that was the head of the snake and that it was going to be our duty to make sure that he couldn't affect the game. So we went in there with a brand new game plan. We played a ton of just straight man-to-man. We wanted to be gapped up in the run game, get extra bodies in there any way we could. And we bottled them up. And I can just remember being on the sideline. We would just be like, let's get back out there and do it again. Let's just get back out there and do it again. That's the mentality. And I feel like I see that in this year's team where those guys just want to suffocate teams defensively. And they've done it all year long. But that was it for me was knowing the challenge that we had. And especially with our offense being a question in that game with Cardale getting his first start, we had no idea. We shouldn't have expected him to be throwing bombs over the top to Devin the way that he was, but he did. But we felt like the game was going to come down to us and what we could do. And leaving Indianapolis with a goose egg on the scoreboard, we did our job.
Since you brought that up, just the build up to that game, obviously with Cardale making that first start, what was that like in the building? As you mentioned the defense knowing they have to go out and do a job, but just you don't see that all that often when especially a third string quarterback going into the year has to step into arguably the biggest game of the season.
There's a confidence that comes along with the program that we had built, and you can see it in the current iteration of Ohio State. where everybody's expected to be ready to step into the game. When your number is called, you have to be prepared. And Urban would always preach that. So Cardale was a guy who, in his early years at Ohio State, maybe wasn't as into the doing the preparation things to be ready for game day. As he matured, he became as great of a preparation guy as anybody you could find in that building, watching tape, getting the mental reps in. So there's a confidence of saying, like, all of our guys should be prepared when they step in. There's the other part of it where it's like, all right, this is the most important position on the field, and he hasn't played a ton of reps. We know he's got a big arm, but if we get into that situation where we feel like the game has to be on his arm, how comfortable are we with that? And that's not a knock on Cardale. It's a knock on any quarterback that's stepping in for the first time. Right. So it was certainly a balance for us. Like, I think everybody was going to feel better about that game if the defense just went in there and dominated. But with Cardale, the one thing that you could count on was that he was going to take advantage of that moment, number one. But number two, him to Devin, man, like that arm and that receiver who could take the top off any coverage, you felt pretty good about that.
Yeah, no doubt. It worked for all those games there. As you look ahead to this matchup, Indiana, like, I know last year was a cool story. This year they followed it up with this undefeated season. But I keep talking to people, at least locally here, and it's like, well, are they really the number 2 team in the country or whatnot? And I think people just have a hard time shaking the reputation of Indiana football. What do you see when you turn on the tape and watch the Hoosiers?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because Indiana up until recently was losing its program in college football history. That is a difficult reputation to shake. And I think Curt Cignetti has done about as good as anybody could do in trying to flip that around. Not only the record, but the confidence that he speaks with and the way that he's put that confidence into his team. I think they're a very good football team. What you see on tape offensively is an offensive line. They're a little bit banged up right now, but an offensive line that rarely gets out of position. They're always in the right pass protection calls, and they like to move people off the line of scrimmage in the run game. You see a run game that they run it more than anybody in the Big Ten. I don't know if people know that, but they attempts per game run it more than anybody in the Big Ten. They've got a few backs that they like to roll in there. That's where they want to get this offense started. But that people talk about the pass game because it should be talked about. Fernando Mendoza became a revelation to anybody who was not watching ACC After Dark games last year. He is a guy who's got the NFL arm. He is a guy who's got the processing ability that you would expect from a pro. He does things right, and he's a leader of that football team. He's also thrown the football to a couple of pros as well, in Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. Like, those guys are going to be playing on Sundays. They're very good players. So it's a complete offense, but they want to get it started with the run. When I look at them defensively, it is the front seven creating chaos. And it's not necessarily one guy that leads the charge there, but they like to move. They like to stunt. They like to move the line of scrimmage back into the backfield. They get TFLs. They get sacks. It's where it starts from. It's the front seven. And then you got Aiden Fisher, who is a leader of that defense in the middle, kind of running things. And then you look at the back end, and they do a good job of disguise. They do a good job of mixing up coverages. And when they want to play man-to-man, they'll play you in zone, but they play man-to-man. And when they want to do it, they feel confident because they've got D'Angelo Pons, who is going to be an All-American and a Sunday player as well. So this is a talented team, no doubt, but it's also a team of discipline. It is a team that knows exactly who they are. And Curt Cignetti deserves a ton of credit as one of the best coaches in college football right now.
So when you look at the Ohio State side of things, obviously people listening to this will be familiar with the Buckeyes, but what is the key for Ohio State to handle the number 2 team in the country?
So there are going to be a couple of keys for me. Is number one, offensively for Ohio State. I think this is a team that's always better when they have balance. And the last handful of games from Bo Jackson has been that balance that Ohio State needs. He's been phenomenal. That offensive line has done a much better job in coming off of that Michigan performance. The offensive line was great. In the run game, they were great in protecting Julian Sayin. But that's what it is for me is making sure the run game is a feature so you can get the clean pockets for the dropbacks. I just mentioned how Indiana wants to create those havoc plays. If you can create balance in your game plan, they'll struggle to do that. The flip side of it, and it's going to sound crazy when I say this, but the flip side of the success for Ohio State is Ohio State's defense needs to make Fernando Mendoza a drop back pocket passer in this ballgame. The games where they have struggled the most, Indiana struggled the most when they went to Kinnick and they played Iowa and against Penn State in the first half, really, of the Wisconsin game. Those were their worst rushing days of the year. They didn't crack 100 yards against Wisconsin. They were barely over 100 yards against Penn State and against Iowa. When they don't have balance to their offense, when they can't run the football, they struggle because their whole pass game is predicated off of RPOs and play actions. It's a run-affected pass game. Fernando Mendoza as a drop-back passer is the one part of his game that I have a concern with. I think that he likes to look at the rush when it's coming at him. That messes up his footwork. He doesn't step into throws. And ultimately, he'll start to miss reads because he's trying to process the pressure. And I think those are scars from when he was at Cal playing behind a really bad offensive line. So all that to say, I think for either team, running the football is actually going to be one of their keys to being able to get up and down the field.
When you look at the matchup, you mentioned Pons, who is a high school teammate of Jeremiah Smith. Those two played against each other last year, but obviously more familiarity behind that. Like, is that one you just look at and say, like, I'm going to focus on that a few times a game?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a matchup to look at. I know all the NFL evaluators are going to be watching that one. Here's the reality of the situation is one-on-one with Jeremiah Smith is not a good matchup for anybody in America. And this is no disrespect to D'Angelo Pons because I think he's a phenomenal player. He's going to have help there. But if you do get that situation where it is true one-on-one, I think it's a matchup that you have to test. I think the flip side of that is if they decide that they're maybe going to play a little man-to-man and they might lean it over to Jeremiah, we watched what Carnell did getting behind coverage basically all year long, and in particular last week against Michigan. He's got to be a guy where you have some plays in the playbook for him as well. And then I'll say this is I think the tight ends for both teams are an interesting wrinkle in the offense. Riley Nowakowski for Indiana's Wisconsin transfer. He's a big feature in their run game. He also is a guy they like to throw screens to. They want to get it to him out in the flats and let him run a little bit. And then we know Ryan Day has been 12, 13, 14 personnel. Like he's loved the tight ends this year. So those will be a big factor as well.
We saw Julian Sayin have maybe the only real adversity he's faced all season, at least in a big game, that second throw against Michigan. His response, I thought, was as good as you could have asked for. Do you think that was important to see from him before you go into these basically win or go home type of games?
I think it was important to see from him, and I think it was important to see the sideline, their reaction, how they wanted to respond to that as well. You know, it's a team that just hasn't been in those situations, and that was like the one game where if they got into that situation, you wanted to see what everybody's response was. And the sideline was cool, right? Defense goes out there, hold them to a field goal, like get stops like they typically do. And then on offense, go back out there and flush the previous drive and say, we're just going to start from scratch, which is exactly what they did. Julian Sayin, people have talked about this Heisman race, and it's probably going to come down to this Big Ten championship between him and Fernando Mendoza. The historic completion percentage to me is a Heisman-worthy stat. The consistency over the scope of the season. He had the best completion percentage over a regular season in college football history. What he did against Michigan with the interception early, in the cold weather, right? Like all the different things, the helmet comms went down, didn't matter. Like he was just a guy who was out there as cool as can be. And I do think it was important for him to have that performance, but also for everybody around them to be able to rally together. It was awesome to watch.
When you've watched this Matt Patricia defense this year, do you think about how much fun it would have been to play in something? I know you guys had some really good ones, but with what Matt Patricia does and the way he's used these linebackers.
I always joke around. I wouldn't have played. There's no way I could have made my way on the field. These guys are too damn good for me to have been on the football field. It looks a lot of fun. You know, like the thing that Matt Patricia has done so well is he's leaned into personnel, right? Like he's looked at his guys and evaluated them on an individual basis and said, what do these guys all do best, right? Like we see Caleb and they allow him to move around in the back end. He'll play in the post. He'll play a deep half. He'll walk up, play over a slot. They'll play him on the line of scrimmage. We see it with Arvell. Well, they'll put him on the line of scrimmage. He plays off ball. They let him spy. We see a similar thing with Sonny Styles. I look at the guys up front, you know, is it 4 down? Are they going to do 5 down? They line up over the center. They let McDonald eat up front. I think he's as important as anybody on this defense to what they're able to do in creating havoc. And I appreciate this idea of a coach coming in to a new situation and not slamming his playbook on the desk and saying, these are all the things that I do that have made me successful. What he has said is, I know what I like to be as a coordinator. I know the things that I'm comfortable with, but what do you guys do well? And what are you comfortable with? And that's what we're going to roll out there on game day. And I give him a ton of credit for that. Like, there are a lot of guys who would have walked in there and been like, oh yeah, like, these guys are really good, but I'm going to be the one, I'm going to be the reason. And he's like, no. Like, they're the reason. I just put them in the right spots to make plays.
Last question I've got for you. I saw your reaction. I think it was on Instagram of the game last week. What did that mean for you and maybe some other former players? Obviously, you guys had your success against Michigan, but just to see these guys get over the hump, fans, obviously, us in the media, we all have our thoughts on it. But as a former player, to see it work out in the positive direction from your perspective, what was that like?
I mean, it was great. And a lot of us have been tough on Ryan Day and the program over the last couple of years, losing that game, in particular last year, the way that went down. And, part of the reason why we're so tough is because being a guy who had never lost, like, I know what it feels like to win in that game. And I know what it feels like to get the gold pants and have them around my neck. And I know what it feels like to be able to walk around this city with my chest puffed out, saying that I was victorious against the most important rival that anybody can have in any game. It's the biggest rivalry in all of sports. And so I want the guys to be able to feel that as often as possible. I'm from this city. I love this city. I love the Buckeyes, and I love beating rivals. And so for me watching that, it was great because there was, none of those guys had experienced that. And there were going to be guys that were walking out the door and that was their last opportunity to get it done. So I'm full of pride for those guys. And for Ryan Day to be back on the right side of that rivalry. And by the way, to say that he was going to do the winning with humility, which I think is important.
Yeah.
It was a very awesome thing to see.
Yeah. All right, Josh. Well, I appreciate you coming on here. I know you're always a busy week, especially this time of year. So I appreciate you giving us time. And I thought that was some good stuff. I
appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again to Joshua Perry for coming on and being a guest, talking about the Big Ten championship game as only he and a handful of others can. When you talk about guys who have been there, done that, also Matt Weaver, but we'll get to him. I want to give some thoughts on this game. I also want to give some thoughts on last week before we get to that. Before we wrap up here, what a cool situation for Ohio State last week at Michigan, and I know it's been talked about. We're later in the week now, and most people have turned their attention to the Big Ten championship game when you're talking about Ohio State. But I know Buckeye fans are still really enjoying that one, and they should. I think going to Ann Arbor, I was a little worried going into that game that, look, this is a decent Michigan team. You're going there. This could be another game like 2023 where you play well enough to win the game, but maybe you don't just because of being on the road and playing another good team, right? And I think obviously Kyle McCord throws that interception or things are very different. And I was a little worried from an Ohio State perspective that you could see some more of that Ohio State goes up there and plays the right way and does all the right things, but just doesn't come away with the win. And now it's 5 in a row and it's the longest losing streak since the 1920s. And it just all compounds, even though you now got the playoff and whatnot. So I thought for Ryan Day and those guys who have taken so much heat over this game. And as Joshua said, like rightfully so, you can't lose that game like this. I thought it was great for them. And Joshua brought up the winning with humility. I think Ryan Day did a good job. I don't know if people saw there was a video going around on social media of some of the players trying to take the Ohio against the world flag towards midfield. After the Michigan players had kind of left the block M, and the coaching staff is like, no, we're not doing that. And look, players, I think, just kind of get caught up in the emotion. I don't think that means they're bad guys or anything like that. They're just excited. They finally beat Michigan, especially for the older guys who have gone through it. And I thought it was great that they were able to have fun and go into the stands and celebrate in the stands. I've watched multiple Ohio State teams that have won in Ann Arbor go do that. So now this group is in that brotherhood of not only winning in Michigan, but getting to jump into the stands with their fans. And there were a ton of Ohio State fans there. And then Julian Sayin playing in the snow. He said the coldest game he'd ever played in was 50 degrees before that. And so, just overcoming things. And I think that says a lot about what this team is and where this team can go. There's a lot of football to be played. And obviously Saturday's game, and I'll get to that in a second, is important. But just getting over that hump, I talked about it last year. Look, it's college football is different, right? And there's going to be more times where probably the winner of or the loser of that rivalry game goes on to make a deep playoff run or win a national championship like Ohio State did last year. Does it diminish that rivalry from a national perspective? Maybe to people outside of it, because they're like, well, I heard Nick Saban talking about how Ohio State fans are crazy because they care about that more than the national championship. And I don't know if that's true. I think everyone has their own opinions, but to go and do that, now you can do something you didn't do last year. You've beaten that team up north. You can go win a Big Ten championship, something that was taken from you by not winning that game last year. And potentially you can now go win a national championship and they can't hold it over you, they being Michigan people, hey, well, we still beat you head to head. And that's important. And this rivalry has to remain important for college football. This rivalry specifically, but the Iron Bowl and the Egg Bowl and, Texas, the Red River shootout rivalry, whatever we want to call it. Like, these are fabrics of college football. And I was worried last year a little bit. And then you saw the intensity of that game. And it's like, okay, great. Well, will it happen again? And then what happened again for an Ohio State team that's undefeated and already knows what it can do if it wins, if it loses, even if it loses that game. And you saw the same kind of emotion and fire and disappointment on the other side from those players and the coaches and everybody, fans, that you saw when this game was all that mattered, when this was the end of the regular season and there wasn't really much afterwards. And I think that's really important. And so I was really happy to see that play out the way that I hoped it would. And I hope that continues. I don't care about, the fact that you could still win a Big Ten or still win a national championship. Those are all good. And those are important also, but these games have to matter because they are so much the fabric of college football, like I said. So really pleased that game, still carries that same weight. And, from Ryan Day and those guys, that they were able to get the monkey off the back, so to speak. And, now you got it in Columbus next year. We'll see how it goes. You got a lot of time to enjoy that. But I do think the Buckeyes have flipped, and I think this is important. I think this is crucial to the way Ryan Day has operated this program this year is, enjoy it. And obviously they enjoyed that one. They got stuck on the plane for like 3 hours. So the guys were all stuck together. And their planes are not like the commercial planes we fly. So I think they probably enjoyed it a little bit on the plane, got to enjoy it there. But this team can now step on to the next goal. There will be times when you get the gold pants and everything, when you can reflect on this win over Michigan more. But now you want to go win a Big Ten championship, something that they haven't done in almost as long as they hadn't beaten Michigan since 2020. So I think that is big. Talking to both Matt and Joshua about this game, like, this should matter. As long as they're playing this game and you're in it, you should take it seriously. And Ryan Day's talked about not only winning a Big Ten championship, but the number one seed in the college football playoff is on the line. And you want that number one seed so that you can sort of dictate where you want to go. Now, the winner of this game will go to the Rose Bowl. I think Ohio State fans, or the Ohio State players, coaches, the Ohio State team will be perfectly happy with that, because they know they're familiar with that from last year. Other years, they know the fan base will be out there. And whoever you play, you're going to be at least at neutral in terms of the split in the crowd, if not more. I mean, you saw that last year with Oregon. I think that is a big factor. And then just, accomplishing another goal is important for this team. Last year they set out to do all three of these things. They got one. Now they got the biggest one, arguably, but they only got one. This year's team, which, they came in the country number 3, but I think a lot of people thought, it's a young team, Matt Patricia, like, we'll see. No, they have the opportunity to go out and do all the things that last year's team wanted to do, and they can do all of them and not just one, which I think is huge. But I don't think it's going to come easy. And you heard Matt talking about Indiana. You heard Joshua talking about Indiana. Like, Dave Biddle and I were talking about this week. Take the Indiana off the helmet. Change the colors. Make them, Michigan, Penn State, whoever it is. This is a really good football team. I've seen people argue like, oh, well, their schedule, they shouldn't be number 2 in the country. I don't care. They've beaten everybody they have. They've beaten almost everybody convincingly. They went into Penn State, and I know it's a bad year for Penn State, but Penn State was starting to turn things around. They went there and played in a difficult environment. Ask any Buckeye fan who's ever been there. If you have not, that place is a ridiculous environment, and they won that game in a tough way. I think that the Buckeyes have to be aware of that, and I think they are. Like, I don't think they're buying into any sort of like, oh, it's Indiana type of stuff. I think they're taking them very seriously. And I think you have to against a team that can hurt you, no doubt about it. And I think this is going to be another big test along the way for Ohio State. I think keys to this, we sort of touched on it with Matt and Joshua, but you've got to find a way to slow down that offense. And Ohio State's obviously been very good at that all season. This is going to be the biggest test of the offense. I think a lot of people thought it would be Texas week 1. Well, Arch Manning, not the Arch Manning everyone thought he would be. Illinois, veteran quarterback, Damon Williams, a dual threat guy like Michigan and Bryce. No, this is the biggest test with a Heisman Trophy, what will be a Heisman Trophy finalist, if not a winner, and 2 really talented receivers. I mean, maybe they're not Jeremiah Smith and Cardale Tate talented, but they're close relatively. So I think that's going to be a challenge. And as Joshua brought up, that run game, like it's, as I said, it's the 9th best rushing attack in the country. He said, as Joshua pointed out, they run more than anybody else. Like, this is a team that can attack you in a lot of different ways. As Ryan Day said all week, they put you in conflict. And Ohio State's seen some of that. They haven't seen it like they're going to see it on Saturday. And on the other side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball, you hope that your guys have gotten better in terms of wide receivers, Cardale Tate and Jeremiah Smith, a little bit healthier. I thought they both looked good on Saturday. And then you've got, Julian Sayin playing his first really big game, I think, based on everything we've seen, like the poise and everything, but you just never know. The run game for me, as Joshua said, is going to be huge. Like, being able to run the ball, you need to build on the Michigan performance. That has to become a thing now going forward. It can't be you did it just against Michigan or you did it just against UCLA and Rutgers. No, you need to have – Bo Jackson needs to be a guy who's getting close to 100 yards fairly regularly now, and these other guys are complementing things like that. The red zone is going to be crucial. You can't have some of the mistakes you had on that first drive early on in the game when you got into the red zone. I highlighted those on a piece I did earlier this week. If you want to read that, kind of looked back at the red zone, which hasn't been as big of an issue for Ohio State as I think people made it out to be, but that was a big situation on Saturday and they didn't get it. So I think that the Buckeyes have to execute at the highest of levels on Saturday. I'm going to wrap it up with what you'll be reading on Sunday morning. This is a night game at Lucas Oil Stadium. So I think this is going to be a hell of a game. I think this is going to be a fun game. I think you could see it back and forth a little bit. Ultimately, I think the difference is going to be Ohio State's defense and being able to show Indiana something they haven't seen all year, because they haven't played a defense like this. And maybe Ohio State hasn't played a defense like Indiana. I just think there's more weapons on the Ohio State side. I think it's going to be fairly close, though. If there is some pull away in the fourth quarter, potentially it doesn't look that way. But on Sunday morning, I think you're reading about, Ohio State edges, maybe not edges. That's not the right word. Ohio State triumphs against Indiana in tight contest, wins Big Ten, locks up number 1 seed in the college football playoff. And then we have a discussion about what it's like to, what you do for this next however many days until you play on December 1st or January 1st, in the Big Ten or in the college football playoff quarterfinal. But it'll be fun to watch. I hope Buckeye fans are going out. I've heard from some season ticket holders that it's been hard to get tickets, so hopefully people are able to get that. But if you see me or any of our guys in Indianapolis on Saturday, please, or on Friday, Saturday, we'll be out Friday. Please come up, say hi. Always fun to meet people. And we'll be out and about in downtown Indy Friday night, I imagine. So thank you to Matt Weaver. Thank you to Joshua Perry. Again, Josh was on NBC. You see him every weekend covering Big Ten football. Matt, if you want to go check out their work over at Peegs, it's the Indiana 24/7 sports site. Thank you again, guys. We'll see how the Buckeyes do. We'll be back next week, one way or the other. So cheers.